delighted to be here because I have been a longtime healthcare guy my whole career, and whether you like it or not, I love it. And of course, we're all consumers of healthcare too, so this is a great conversation that's been had today, and I'm looking forward to our little session here today.
That's great. And I've been building what today we call digital health companies for the past 25 years. Now building something on the heels of work that we've done at Comcast. It's a very interesting innovation around virtual care, which just feeds right into the story we heard from the previous panel. It just feeds right into that story about early prediction, early detection, early response, engagement in the home and where people live, work, and play. So that's the work that I'm leading. And so with that, perhaps we start with you, just focusing on the future of virtual care. You've been involved with quite a few efforts over the years. Maybe you can tell a little bit of that journey and give your ideas about where virtual care is going.
Yeah, that's great, because when I think about this, I won't go into anything related to Babylon for now, as I specifically am here to lead the U.S. efforts for Babylon's entrance in the country here. But I will talk about it based upon my experience, what I've observed in the industry, and that is, one, when you think about the future of virtual care, you first have to reflect on the current. But before I do that, I think about the best predictors of the future. To me, are the old cartoon in 60 years ago, the Jetsons. The Jetsons, they actually invented 14 things that exist today, and this was 60 years ago. Things like the pill cam that went down and that's actually a real thing now. Mm-hmm. Drones. But they also had the ability to see a doctor virtually. So they had it on the phone, on their watch, and they'd see a doctor. The doctor would look down their throat and see what they have. So a long time ago, they were predicting this. And as a matter of fact, telemedicine, of course, we all know, and I think the conversation just prior to us was talking about accessibility and affordability and building trust through transparency. And the cool thing with that is that we all know that that's really the magic in it, hence the advent of telemedicine. And if you think about telemedicine, as I think about it, we're really in the early days, even though in the 1990s, places like Kaiser Permanente and Mayo Clinic were doing, telemedicine at that time, the ability to call a doctor, and today it's growing dramatically. There's a lot of hype about it, but in reality, we are only in the early days. Utilization, just as a result of telemedicine implementations today, for the populations who have access to it, is under 10% on average. So that means that out of the population of 100, 10 use it once per year. And that's not because the solutions are bad. It's really that, we're really at the 1.0 of the life cycle of the journey that we're in, which is really exciting. Currently, and we use the term now, virtual care, where you're wrapping much more than the ability to talk to a doctor via voice or potentially a video. We're using virtual care in the broader context, which I think is really important and a key theme to the future, and that is the ability to not just connect with the doctor when I'm sick, but to use other digital means to give me my care. Whether that's the Buoy team with a chatbot that allows me to assess my symptoms, or if that's actually talking to the doctor or receiving content or notifications and reminders, things like that create a broader ecosystem, as we may think of virtual care as 2.0 of the journey. But the future, to me, is really exciting. But I think as well, and I'll just comment on the themes before us, because if I think of the things that are important to that future of virtual care, it's much more comprehensive. First and foremost, the comprehensiveness is in the nature of the platform itself, but also the capabilities. So today, telemedicine is primarily used for urgent care. When I'm sick, when I need something there that replaces that urgent care visit, it's expanding a little bit into behavioral health. The future is much more broad in nature, and it has all of the chronic conditions capabilities, the ability to be served by not just when you're sick, but also, as I vowed to my wife, in sickness and in health, and the ability to have, that full spectrum, not just when I'm sick once or twice a year, but to use it on a broader basis and much more relevant basis in our daily lives. It must provide when I'm sick, but also when I want to stay well and stay healthy. And some of the key aspects of that are things like monitoring my behaviors, my actions, what I'm doing, monitoring my mood, so I can potentially notify me and keep me on track so I stay healthy. Those are really important to the future of virtual care. The other factors that come into mind are things that we're starting to do, which is the ability to provide fully integrated artificial intelligence, so that you can not just be guided through your symptoms to the next step and what the potential diagnosis is, but to actually carry the artificial intelligence through the journey so that it's helping the doctors and caregivers and notifying loved ones when they're at home, or if you're elderly living at home, to have the ability to have your loved ones be notified when that happens. So those are some of the key things that I've observed, but also I'm thinking about when it comes to virtual care future.
That's really fantastic.
Love to hear yours.
Yeah, so just building on those thoughts, and it's actually, I think, awesome that we're following the panel that we just heard. The themes that are emerging are really all about one, more and more consumer engagement; two, a change in the venue of where care is delivered, right, outside those silos, into where we live, work, play, as we go about our lives. More and more care being delivered in those care settings. And then another, just a foundational theme, is that it's really all about enabling people. And this is ultimately, I think, the crux of where change will happen at scale. Delivering care to people who need it the most in a predictive manner, before they even know that they need it. And the folks who need it the most are folks who have multiple chronic conditions, folks who are aging. More than we'll have by the end of 2030, we'll have more people over 65 than young people in this country, and this is a trend in most developed nations around the world, where as our populations get older, we're going to have to live with and deal with the burden of long-term conditions, chronic conditions, for longer and on a much greater scale. The thing that will fundamentally tip the scales is that those folks and the cost burden that they will impose on our economies under the current way that we deliver care is simply unsustainable, right? If we can imagine a future where we're able to identify risk as it's emerging, before it becomes an ambulance ride, before it becomes an emergency room admission, before it becomes a hospitalization, that's where we are going to see the biggest impact on cost of care. And I think that's what's going to tip the scales ultimately to making virtual care become what the folks in the previous panel predicted, which is, it's what we do, rather than what only some of us do who can afford it. I think the tipping point is really all about cost. One other thought I want to convey is, we talk a lot about consumer engagement, we talk a lot about behavior change, and I happen to believe that behavior change is just one of those really, really hard things to achieve until Elon's Neuralink succeeds, until we can actually stick ourselves into some machine and be programmed to not like sugar anymore, or love to exercise, or change our habits, fundamentally change who we are. Behavior change is just very hard to accomplish at scale. And I think that as we progress from a consumer engagement perspective, technologies that are passive, technologies that are surrounding us, that are helping us, nudging us, rather than expecting us to have long sustained change because we're just, we've become better at what we're doing. I think those are the kinds of technologies that we will see enabling virtual care in the future, and those are, again, the technologies that will drive down cost. Final driver of cost being, the final reason for cost being the driver is that even folks who are healthy, living well, are having to make more and more decisions about how they're spending their dollar, because they're being asked to pay higher and higher premiums and higher deductibles. And I think that, again, will incentivize people to adopt these kinds of technologies and use them for both themselves and their loved ones who are getting up in the years or are living with these kinds of conditions. That's where I see the world going with virtual care, well beyond telehealth consultations, which, you know, I happen to agree with comments made in the previous panel, that those sometimes add cost rather than reduce cost to our economies.
Okay. Very good.
Right.
Excellent.
So in terms of technologies, you mentioned AI. What other technologies do you imagine we will start seeing to enable this kind of future vision?
Yeah, well, certainly there's plenty of technology to work with, and there'll be much more down the line. And from the standpoint of delivering this, which is really the how are we going to bring this future to life? And technology, certainly I will comment on the AI. It's very, very important, because AI just isn't a fun, cool thing, but it really does get at the heart of driving cost out. I think your comment about, you know, the utilization of a virtual visit might actually increase cost depending on how it's done. And so that aspect, the AI, in integrating that so that we can augment doctors and scale caregivers is really the key to success. And doing that in a way that is seamless throughout the journey, so that the visibility to information to make the doctors and the caregivers' job much easier and more accurate, because that's a second key theme to AI, is accuracy. And if we can reduce the number of, in the United States, just read there's 12 million or 15 million people that are misdiagnosed, and the costs associated with that are enormous. There's $750 billion each year here in the United States alone that is spent on serious illness misdiagnosis, meaning the advent of things like second opinion services have been valuable to reducing those costs. But AI will be informative to the doctors and caregivers to give them predictors and information that they wouldn't have, or at least get reminded on, not to replace doctors, but to really scale their unique expertise in our industry. So accuracy, the ability to predict in terms of what's next, what might be my situation, what might be my preventative action, and ultimately to even predict risk for me based upon my heredity, based upon my behaviors, and all of that combined, so it notifies me of where I might be off track and need to get back on track to prevent those future issues. So that's a really big part of our future is AI, because without bringing that forward, and you see massive investments in our country, you see massive investments in Canada with regards to these types of initiatives, which is really exciting. The other areas are data and integration. I'll start with integration. Integration is obviously critical. The ability to integrate with EMRs and other disparate systems that we know exist and are prevalent throughout our industry, but the ability to integrate with wearables, devices, to get that data in, because it's all about personalization. If we want to meet, like the folks said, to make it more accessible, more convenient, more affordable, where people want to use it, where they have a delightful experience in healthcare, which doesn't happen very often today, is the ability to make a personalized experience. And when the more data you can get in to that experience to make it highly personalized, I think is critical in terms of the technology that's needed. And then certainly data, the power of AI, everything we talk about, the ability to make it personalized is extremely valuable. I always think of our natural analogy of the Amazon story. When you think about where they started with potentially books, we probably wouldn't think of it that relevant in our life if it was only books today. How often do we buy books? Compared to what we buy now, but why we buy so many things is all the personalization, the data, the integration that they have, as well as AI. That's my view. Now,
Go ahead.
I'm a novice compared to you as a thought leader in the industry, so I'd love to hear your perspective on technology.
Certainly. So, very much along the lines that you described. Again, picking up from the previous panel, we heard about diagnostic testing moving into the home, right? So I'm co-founder of a company that's got its own lab device that's just launched in the UK, doing very similar things. The kinds of tests that you would traditionally go to a doctor's office or a hospital to get done and then wait 24 hours for the results to come back because they've been sent out someplace. Those kinds of technologies will in fact make their way into at least primary care and over time into our homes, into devices that we can just use as consumer grade devices the way we do a glucose test today. We're definitely going to see diagnostics that are blood-based starting to become ubiquitous. It's all about increasing the signal, the predictive signal, before higher acuity arises, right? So the next thing that I imagine will happen, and we're working on some of these technologies as we speak, the next thing that I imagine is that this reliance on wearables, which, for certain things, they're incredibly useful, but people forget to wear them. People forget to charge them. People leave them home, people lose them, they get borrowed. All of those kinds of things happen. And therefore, when some intervention is needed, you don't get the signal, and then it's late. Or you don't get the signal, and bad things have already happened. We think that these kinds of signals around your safety, your health, your well-being, are going to start emerging out of the woodwork of the places where we live and work. We are going to start winding up finding ambient sensors built into our homes, sitting on a coffee table. We're going to wind up with these kinds of ambient sensors built into literally the walls of our homes, where they're unobtrusively helping keep an eye, with our consent. Now, privacy is going to be a real issue, but with our consent, keep an eye on things the way that home security does today, right? Home security, we've all accepted it. We've got sensors in our homes and we turn the alarm on, or it turns on by itself at certain times of every day, and then we don't worry about that. And we know that if something goes wrong, that there'll be some response. That response will actually get us the help we need. We think that with ambient sensing, we're going to wind up with that kind of a future where, based on how you're walking, based on your respiratory rate, based on your heart rate, which we know we can measure through the air now, we are going to be able to actually predict emerging risk. We are going to be able to intervene early. We are going to be able to prevent falls because we know that someone's actually starting to get unstable. We are going to be able to say, you're really not taking using your inhaler properly, or you're really not taking your asthma meds because we're starting to see that last night you were coughing and having difficulty breathing, because we could measure that. Those are the kinds of virtual care interventions that I think we are going to start seeing over the next 2-3 years, and in a 10-year horizon, those will actually become commonplace. There's this big privacy concern that has to be addressed around all of this kind of technology, but we think that that's where the world is going. And cost will no longer be the same anymore. The silos will no longer be the same anymore, because this information actually will connect those silos. How is all this going to get paid for?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Are we out of time? Now, there is, so I have a belief on this, is that I think everybody will be happy to pay for it, and they'll stand in line to pay for it, but only if you're really taking cost out. So essentially it should fund. All these things should really pay for themselves. And, so the ability to actually use AI, and it actually does have the implications downstream with the caregivers and the impact on scale, and make it more accessible to get the care that you need when you need it, both in person as well as digitally. Those cost outs will have a meaningful impact on our industry. What are we approaching? 20% GDP and healthcare continues to rise. We all know that challenge. But I do believe that that'll be a big factor. Certainly the political stage and environment in the future will have an impact. But regardless of where that goes, I do think that people will be standing in line to pay for it, including us as consumers, as it becomes much more of an empowered consumer world for healthcare. And as more information becomes more transparent, the decisions will be in the hands of the consumers. So in the end, I believe that they'll pay for it.
So we're getting close to the end of the slot. I'd love to leave room for one or two questions, but before that, perhaps you can just tell us, Babylon's been this very interesting company that has really turned primary care on its head in the UK. They launched with a bang. They went out and did some really innovative things where there was change that you could see and feel every year occurring in primary care in the UK, to the point where this traditional primary care providers actually found Babylon to be incredibly threatening on the one hand, and consumers found Babylon to be incredibly appealing on the other. Babylon's been part of a major change in people's expectations about primary care in the UK. What are your plans for the US?
Yeah, well, it's a good comment because there's lessons learned, right? The company was founded in 2014 by a brilliant visionary, Dr. Ali Parsa, and immediately their first customer was the NHS. And certainly as it relates to providing, it's an interesting market too. Obviously a single payer, everything's covered by the government, massive lines to wait for your primary care doctor. So the same needs that we have here, just a different type of a payer's model. And the rollout of Babylon within the NHS required the patient to choose the doctor and the primary care place. So I would switch from my doctor to Babylon as an example as my full primary care practice. And so that did create out of the gates some of the challenges with the current doctor in the primary care market. Over the time, some of that is dissipated, but the reality is the consumers love it. But we also have much more of a comprehensive integrated strategy. So one, we have in-person, physical clinics as well as the digital first thing. So it's an integrated model from that perspective. It's also a capitated model, meaning we actually are on the hook. We get paid for the life, and then we treat the patient population. So it's a great model to really experiment from that perspective about what it really means to bend the cost curve associated with a life. And that's a very interesting opportunity and a great learning experience for us. We took that and we were fortunate to go to Asia through a big relationship with Prudential and Tencent as well. And then through our work with the government of Rwanda, it ties to our mission of putting affordable, accessible healthcare in the hands of everyone on earth, which is our mission and we think about every day. Working with a less wealthy country like Rwanda that now is doing 3,000 consultations per day under a government-sponsored program again there has been extremely valuable to our learning. And then we also entered Saudi Arabia, Canada, and now the U.S. through our recent round of funding. We've been able to be fortunate to secure around $600 million so that we're going to invest into furthering our AI platform as well as entering markets like the United States, which are certainly unique and different, but big opportunities for us. So plans are underway. We have secured two very large strategic partners to help us in the marketplace here. We're implementing, we plan to go live in January, and our strategy will not be a direct-to-consumer strategy right out of the gates. It will be partnering with folks that can really provide not just distribution to consumers and their members, but also be thought leaders and really help us along the way as true partners. So we have two, and we expect to have 3 to 5 next year to kind of round that out, just to kind of let you know what our plans are.